This is one of the few places here at the Skyscraper Museum amongst friends that I can really share with you something that I don't normally advertise. But I am an avid collector of postcards of insurance company buildings. It's not a huge popular thing. I don't have that many competitors out there. There aren't any others. I'm sort of cornering the market on postcards of insurance company buildings, and there's some really neat ones here. I mean, some of these are pretty nondescript buildings. Those are often the ones that I end up liking the best, like Maccabee Mutual Life there in Michigan, or you've got this they got the Banker's Life in Des Moines, and that kind of interwar stripped classicism kind of style that was popular amongst the fascists, as well as federal architecture during the 1930s. This is a really funky late 50s, early 60s one from Topeka. They're very mod right here. This is Mass Mutual. Outside of Springfield, an incredibly powerful corporation in that city, still the leading corporation of Springfield. Part of a tradition, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, of building these massive neo-colonial mansions, not downtown, but at the outskirts of the city, as some of these large industrial towns begin to decentralize. This is what used to be. Every town used to have one of these, a Second Empire-style pile. This is Etna in Hartford, their building, which I'm going to return to as well. That's also Hartford. That's the Travelers. Their lovely tower. Of course, some of these are well-known buildings, Metropolitan Life. But even more interesting in some ways is this one. This is Occidental Life in Albuquerque. Now, I think, this was made in about 1917, I think that the makers of Occidental Life in Albuquerque, they knew about MetLife, and they knew that MetLife in New York had built this incredible tower that was modeled on the Campanile of St. Mark's in Venice. He said, well, we're not a big enough city to build a huge tower, so we're not going to build the Campanile, but we'll build the Doge's Palace. That's what it is. Sorry, this is a real inside baseball there. That's the Doge's Palace. I really should have have a picture here of Venice to show you that this is the Doge's Palace, and this is the Campanile. But they're trying to associate themselves with a very powerful trend in insurance company building, of building these impressive pieces of architecture. It turns out, ladies and gentlemen, that you can't do the history of American architecture in the 20th century or American urbanism without insurance company buildings. They are absolutely central every step of the way. We shouldn't be surprised. They're selling something that's a little bit of a tough sell. They're selling financial security. They're not selling sewing machines. They're not selling typewriters. And I'll come back at the very end to some of these buildings, Carol, from the postcards that you saw. I should say many of these, I won't show you every time one of my postcards shows up, but you'll begin to see them throughout this whole thing. But every step of the way in the history of American architecture in the 20th century, you can tell through insurance company buildings. The first tall buildings in American cities. Really, the first buildings over 8 stories, for example, they're insurance company buildings. 1867, Equitable Life Insurance, right here in New York, builds, again, Second Empire style. This is the style made popular by Napoleon III's addition to the Louvre in Paris. So again, buildings like these are really the first skyscrapers in American cities built by insurance companies. The Home Life Insurance Company in Chicago. Now, this is even a branch office. The main office is in New York. But when they go to Chicago, they hire William LeBaron Jenney to build a skyscraper there. Architectural historians debate whether or not this building is the first skeleton-framed structure in which the entire structure of the building is held up by the iron frame, not by the masonry walls. So the masonry walls, in a way, become a kind of curtain wall hung on the wrought iron. Now, I have colleagues who will say, of course, the wrought iron has been sunk into the masonry, so it must be holding some of the weight. But it's an insurance company building creating this debate in the first place. We'd have these incredible monuments of the early 20th century, the skyscrapers, where Metropolitan Life, over many years now, is buying up land around Madison Square Park to erect their incredible tower. These were their buildings too. In the 30s, they say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a 100-story tower. Then they pulled over Harvey Wiley Corbett from Rockefeller Center, say design is a 100-story tower. Now, it didn't pan out that way, so they have a 30-story or so base to a 100-story tower. You see how kind of ungainly the scale is without its massive massive shaft into the sky. And of course, people who work in this building say it has the most elevator banks of any building of its size, because it has the elevators for a 100-story building, but it's only about 30 stories tall. Now, the fact that MetLife moved to a midtown location was an indication that downtown was getting crowded, that it was a crowded place to do business, and it was getting very, very built up. This point was driven home in 1913 when the Equitable built their tower in downtown. They tore down this one and ended up building this one. The tower was almost immediately maligned as being a hogger of light and air. A hogger of space with 40 stories going straight up to the sky like this. In fact, many of us have argued that the Equitable Building of 1913 hastens New York's zoning code, the comprehensive zoning code of 1916, which says you've got to step back. The wedding cake style that now has become the kind of de facto shape of Art Deco buildings in the next generation of building. So, they're building this too to represent themselves as a powerful force, but they may have risked the kind of benevolent part of benevolent self-interest when they built this one. For smaller towns, places like Hartford, they're not really vying for space and building so many towers downtown in this way. They're not building big towers in a midtown area. When insurance companies in Hartford stretch out, they move just down the road a little bit, just maybe a mile outside of downtown, and build these huge mansions in areas that had been suburban districts. So they want to fit in. They don't want to offend the suburban mores of that place, and they build these massive neo-Georgian, neo-colonial manors. So Mass Mutual is part of this trend. This is being built all over the place. This is done by James Gamble Rogers, the brilliant architect of Yale's residential colleges, and he essentially builds a residential college here for Etna. It looks like Timothy Dwight, for those of you who've been to New Haven and recognize it. Now, taking the 20th century to the next phase, we have this part of the story. Suburbanization. Forget the city entirely. We can have a much more efficient workspace for our people if we build a new modernist campus out in the suburban fringes. And they hire a well-known firm, well-known for making high-quality modernist buildings, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. We often attribute the design to Gordon Bunshaft, but we know he worked with Natalie DeBlois and Roger Radford and a whole bunch of other people. And of course, the firm is very important here, and I'll come back to talking about that later. This was their answer to the problem in the 1950s of the city. It represents a very widely shared disenchantment with urban environments as a place in which to do business. So the history of the 20th century can be told in these insurance company buildings. So when I found this postcard in my collection of the Prudential Center straddling the Massachusetts Turnpike, I knew there was a book there. So I went with it, and in fact, I was able to contact the widow of Roger McConey and get the permission to doctor it up and put it on the cover of the book. So I do credit him with taking this amazing photograph, really accelerating our story of the role that insurance companies play in post-war urban change. And the scale is much bigger now, isn't it? It is the iconic tower. But now set within, as I'll show you, a kind of urban pastoral landscape, a massive midtown campus, housing not only the tower, but many other types of buildings for retail and hotel and convention center and the rest of it. And now connected directly to a major urban highway, wanting really the best of both worlds, wanting suburban-style accessibility, but without sacrificing the iconic skyscraper with Prudential plastered atop the top like a typographical cornice line advertising the company that had built it. So again, why the Pru? It's not, as an architectural historian, you kind of have to explain yourself a little bit here, because we're used to architectural historians looking at buildings that are considered good architecture, good design, not the buildings that are considered post-war corporate schlock, right? But my intention is not to revive the Pru as good architecture, really, although I have an incredible fondness for it, to tell you the truth. Even the ticky-tacky facade is now for me, very kind of charming. It is the sort of ugly duckling that we love, even if we love to hate it in some sense. But because it is implicated in all of these incredible trends of the post-war city. Now, there are lots of part of the story that I'm going to just mention here that I won't tell you about. There's an excellent book, there's several chapters that go over the fact that the Pru and the Pike are a single megastructure It is a suburban-style interchange right there in essentially the heart of the city in the Back Bay. And until they built Copley Place over the interchange, this was an open highway interchange right there in the middle of the Back Bay. It was a chance to talk about politics and the politics of urban renewal and how the policies of urban renewal in which they were willing to give incredible tax breaks and subsidies to enable the corporations to make these kinds of investments came to the fore, where in fact Prudential's investment in Boston was seen as a kind of godsend, that the city wouldn't survive without it, that Prudential's investment was absolutely crucial. It was an opportunity to talk about post-war corporate architecture and the way that the firm is organized. And here we have the designers, at least from the beginning, Charles Luckman and William Pereira, and I'll come back to that. It was a chance to talk about design, urban design, good and bad, but like it or not, the paradigm for making space in the 1950s. Plazas completely divorced from the life of the street around it. Exactly the kind of landscapes that we now sort of love to hate. So it really was an opportunity to talk about this transition. The transition from the railroad city, the city organized around railroads and the kind of density implied by that concentration, to this landscape. The city of corporate towers, convention centers and hotels, new downtown apartment living, and the highways, of course, that would run through the whole thing. Now, there are many other examples about this, especially insurance companies' implication in post-war urban renewal. Everywhere you turn in urban renewal, there's an insurance company paying for the project. And as a nod to the New Havenophiles here in the audience, I wanted to show you another incredible example of an insurance company's role in post-war urban renewal. Don't worry, I'm not going to write an entire book about the Knights of Columbus Tower. Or maybe I will. It's a great tower. It's an incredible project. Again, people love to hate it. I find it incredibly elegant, to tell you the truth, where they have the services put in these cylindrical corner pieces all the way up and down with the exposed core 10 concrete. It's absolutely astounding. But even more than the tower itself, and remember, Knights of Columbus, it is a Catholic fraternal organization, but how they make their money is selling insurance. It's an insurance company, fundamentally, linked completely with the Route 34 connector, the urban highway, like the extension of the Pike, and the Veterans Coliseum, the New Haven Veterans Memorial Coliseum, also designed by Roach and Dinkaloo, which was taken down, as I'll come back to later. So many of the pieces of the Prudential landscape are seen right there, too. Again, everywhere you turn, as cities in the 40s and 50s begin to reinvent themselves, begin to remake themselves from the dirty, rail-based, coal-based industrial towns into the white-collar landscapes that they imagined themselves to be, everywhere you turn, there's an insurance company involved. And the way we start this story is in Pittsburgh, where the Point, this gritty industrial area, which was known for the kind of smog that actually we talk about when we talk about Beijing these days. It shows you how in China now catches up to the kind of development that we had in the United States in the 40s and 50s, where air quality and smog is a huge issue in these places. There's a smog ordinance in Pittsburgh in the 50s as part of this whole thing, to remake the landscape as the Gateway Center. Designed by Eggers and Higgins, the kind of Corbusian, cruciform plan towers set in a park, ideally, although in reality often set in a parking lot. That's how it often turns out. And then just to go back to my collection, showing how it's presented. Here, the Gateway Center strikes a very kind of Rockefeller pose here, sort of in-your-face Beaux-Arts, very kind of respectable and lovely. And this is sort of the interior landscape of the Gateway Center. Not very much appreciated as architecture, but the insurance company at the helm as they remake the post-war city. This is a key moment at mid-century because, as I say, one solution is a suburban solution. Forget the city. We want nothing to do with it. The other, that Travelers takes up, is to remake downtown. To take this whole area in Hartford, which was the Front Street area, it's actually sort of like the Little Italy part of town, completely displaced, not unlike the West End in Hartford, and remake it as a massive plinth over a parking garage, very much the Prudential solution here, and the tower sort of sprouting out all over it, creating this kind of landscape. Again, trying to mimic, in a way, the logic of the suburbs in the city. It turned out, as what we can talk about, to be a bad strategy. I mean, you don't want to try to beat the suburbs at their game. You have to stress what the cities are really good at. And we've only learned that now, 25 years after the fact of this whole thing. But the precedents for these major projects, right? Constitution Plaza in Hartford, Gateway Center in Pittsburgh, Knights of Columbus in New Haven, the Prudential Center in Boston, are these really interesting, very rich interwar projects in which private enterprise is posing as a civic institution. And these are some projects which are miraculous urbanistically and incredibly sophisticated in terms of infrastructure and transport, but not at the post-war scale of the highway of all of these other places. Rockefeller Center, of course, and the Cleveland Terminal Tower. Anyone from Cleveland here? Cleveland people? You are. Oh, so you must know the Terminal Tower.
I used to go through it every day at school.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, it was bought by the Ratner family, well known for their work in Brooklyn these days, where they took out some of the sloping ramps that made it so elegant, the access, and kind of straightened the whole thing out. But that's another story. The Civic Tower. This was built, I should just say, as one of my many, I'm sure, tangents, by the Van Swearingen brothers, who also built Shaker Heights, the suburban development. And they built the interurban railroads out there as well. And what they finally did is realize what they never could during the City Beautiful movement in Cleveland, but bring all the railroads together. They do it, the brothers do it, in this incredible complex, the rails underneath, and then they've got department store, hotel, offices, and of course the iconic office building too. These are the models from before the war that people like Prudential are picking up in the post-war period. This tradition of private civic development. And this is exactly what Prudential was thinking about when they brought their project. Look how outlandish it looked in the very beginning. Look at this spaceship come land in Back Bay, Boston. There's nothing like it. Nothing like it around. Completely new landscape. I mean, it's hard for our eyes maybe to adjust to see how different these places were. It ended up being much more modest as it was ultimately built. But this is the model, the civic project, the private yet civic project. How? Why? Why would insurance companies be so crucial to this whole thing? What makes them such important heavy hitters in the urban development game? And the answer is they have an incredibly successful business with an incredibly successful business model. Selling life insurance, it turns out, is a huge winner over the course of the 20th century. And I put this to you today. I don't think life insurance is quite as popular today as it was over the course of the 20th century as a form of estate planning or as a kind of investment or however you want to look at it. But over the course of the 20th century, it was huge. Prudential's was a very specific model. It was industrial insurance. So the Equitable and others were selling insurance starting from the 1860s, more ordinary insurance for the clerks and business people of the town, more the middle class people already living in the city. John Dryden, Yale dropout, never quite finished, then went to work at night. We'll still claim him a little bit. He actually came back to Yale to give the Yale insurance lectures once he was senator of New Jersey at the beginning of the 20th century. So he turned out to be quite a success, this guy. But he's a missionary. He's a social missionary. He believes that the working class people of the city deserve life insurance. Initially, it's burial insurance, essentially. It's enough money just to be able to afford to bury the breadwinner once he kicks the bucket. And this was a major problem. It was picking up in a corporate guise what some of the old cooperative societies and guilds used to do, sort of taking care of their own, with one key difference, which is the application of actuarial science, which is this incredible tool, essentially, to leverage information about human mortality to set the correct premiums. So in a way, the house never loses with insurance. It's an incredible invention and a very successful one. And they went door to door collecting the small premiums from the working class families of the city. Here's the agent. Papa is away. He's working at the factory. But here's Mama with her brood. And now he's like, okay, give me your 3 cents a week, and I'll come back next week and pick it up again. And they'll have now insurance for the family. The business model is incredibly powerful, and the advertising doesn't really change that much over the years. I don't know when they ever marketed life insurance to women. It wouldn't have been until the 70s or 80s. They're almost exclusively marketing it to the male breadwinner with this basic message. Little Susan's in good hands. This is kind of Kennedy, sort of mod, but it's the same advertisement 25 years later. It's the basic message from the 1890s. Though death may enter there, though sorrow be your share, it is much indeed when grief must be endured, to think despite the blow, how comforting to know we are insured. The children are asleep. They don't know yet that their father's gone. She's stricken, obviously, but she slowly unravels that life insurance policy. And she knows that everything's going to be okay. This basic, powerful message that to be a good father, you have to buy life insurance. If not, you are morally inept. It's what builds the incredible dynasties of the 20th century to create cities exactly as I've begun to describe them to you. Now, eventually, Prudential hits on the Rock of Gibraltar. Now, this is a good thing. This is a good message. That's solid. Now, as you know, the Rock of Gibraltar is a limestone promontory at the tip of the Iberian Peninsula. But this boy, seen from a public school, teacher says, "Where's the Rock of Gibraltar?" The bright boy reads the papers. It's in Newark, New Jersey. It's owned by the Prudential Life Insurance Company. Very, very successful branding. It's got to be a case study in branding out there. Now, eventually, as Prudential grows this successful model, they do end up building a kind of rock of their own in downtown Newark. This massive headquarters building built by the great commercial architect of that period, George Post. He worked on the Equitable and so many buildings. Incredible guy to look into. When they really wanted to hit you over the head, they would embed their building in the Rock of Gibraltar. Double security. You can trust us. And this is the whole thing. You have to be able to trust the insurance company. So when they invest in downtown Newark, they're saying, we're successful. You can give us the money. We're not going anywhere. We are solid as a rock. You are taken care of. So again, insurance companies have this very important relationship to the symbolic functions of architecture, to buildings, maybe more than almost any other kind of corporation. Now, Prudential grows, though. They get big. They get really big. And eventually, Post doubles the building here, and they build a whole warren of buildings. In 1945, Pru has a whole kind of urban campus here in downtown Newark. Many of you will know these buildings are now gone. During the 60s, they built a modern tower here. But to their credit, the headquarters of Prudential is still right there in downtown Newark on Broad Street. They are still in place. But they're now seeing this as a problem. There's too many people in this big urban campus and things aren't working efficiently. Talent is getting lost into cracks, right? People are being smothered by bureaucracy. So a guy in the methods department, when you call it corporate operations today, he comes up with a powerful idea. Break it up. Take the company from Newark and now deploy these regional home offices all across the country. It's essentially an administrative plan. Let's not forget that. It's a way of making the corporation more efficient, which is why I love this kind of diagram from Fortune, from 1964. It's about these guys. These great, not the most diverse group, but there they are. The future leaders of Prudential will come from one of these heads of the regional home offices, and they build them in cities across the country. And the Prudential Center in Boston is really the last of these. It is the northeastern home office of the Prudential Insurance Company. More than just a branch office, but really kind of a quasi-autonomous branch or regional office of the company that was in charge of local investment, local sales, local marketing, so they could really develop the executive talent in the whole group. Yes, the Prudential Center is the last of these, the Northeastern Home Office. Now, they would go to work, and they would apply a very particular strategy, architectural and urban strategy to these projects. And they'd be very consistent about it. They wanted the iconic tower. They wanted to have Prudential emblazoned atop the top. They wanted the building to be a visual advertisement for the company. That was very important to them. But they didn't want a downtown location. They didn't want to worry about all the mess and the traffic. They're anticipating the new post-war regional metropolis in which people will be getting to work in different ways and from different parts of the city. They want to position themselves strategically in a kind of midtown part of the city. It's what they do in 1948 when they build the Western Home Office by Werdeman and Beckett. Welton Beckett, many of you will know, is a very influential architect from this period, and frankly, I think a brilliant one, although he's sometimes grouped on the kind of commercial side as opposed to the artist side. He designed the Capitol Records building, you know, that beautiful circular building there in Los Angeles. This building is very elegant, and maybe one of the most of all of the ones that they did. Now, Wilshire Boulevard, where they built it, was already a major retail strip from the 20s, right? The department stores are moving out of downtown onto Wilshire. They make it into a business district, an office district. It's a very contextual building. They have a department store here, Orbach's, facing Wilshire Boulevard. They have a little commercial strip right here built into it. It's really a lovely piece. It's since been mucked around with, but the same building's there. Now you say, wait a minute, there's no tower here. This is Wilshire Boulevard, people. There it is, the Prudential. Arthur Murray, learn to dance there? Anyone learn it still? I don't know, they're very much a product of Wilshire Boulevard. I just love this picture from the Prudential archives that show it as the iconic tower in the Midtown location. They go to Houston. Now, they could have had an incredible site right in downtown Houston. They say, no, we don't want it. We're going to come out right by the Weiss Institute, about 4 miles away from downtown on Old Main Street, where they built a huge campus, tons of parking, tennis courts and all the rest of it, designed by Kenneth Franzheim, very well-known regional modernist from that time. He did a lot of deco towers in the interwar period. Interesting architect. The building is a little ungainly in terms of its massing. It's very Rockefeller Center, though, with the limestone and the kind of little crenellations, little kind of modern deco trim going on here. Of course, this is key. You got the Prudential built into the whole thing. Now, when Life went there, they called it a paradise for office girls. And they interview Ovita Smith, who was willing to work at Prudential for $20 less than the other insurance company because they had a swimming pool and they had a cafeteria, and it's really post-war corporate welfare, where you bring in the people to your campus, you're making a very comfortable environment for them to help them to get to perform better. And then they go to Chicago, where they build the Mid-America Home Office, where they crack the code to develop over the rail yards of the Illinois Central. Now, is this a Midtown district? Not exactly, but it's just outside of the loop. It is pioneering a new business district. That's the key thing to remember here. Designed by Mason Murphy, with views in perpetuity down, Michigan Boulevard there. And if you go there today and you walk out of the Art Institute and you take a right and you're at the beautiful new Millennium Park, there it is, the Prudential Center. They would completely remake the whole area of the yards. This is now the Illinois Center. Some of you will know the Aqua Tower by Studio Gang is built there. All of this stuff. Look at this incredible thing by Ed Durrell Stone for Standard Oil. Holy smokes. Prudential would build another one there too. This is all completely built out. Prudential is the one that makes this whole area a business district. Chicago emboldens them to take on Boston, where there's an old rail yard there for sale. The Boston and Albany's put it up for sale. It's owned by the New York Central, so Robert Young is sort of running the show here. Why are they selling it? Because this is the 50s, people, and people aren't taking trains anymore. And the railroad companies are nervous as all heck. They got to figure out how they're going to make money. And one of the things that they end up doing is trying to get the most out of their urban real estate. That's one of their central assets. So they're liquidating. This is their old yard, and they're getting rid of it. Who can step in to fill the place of the railroad? You know the answer. Only an insurance company. And they come up with this incredible plan that they produce in 1957 to work over the site. And there's Shanks, Carol Shanks, the president of Prudential, and there's John Hines, the mayor of Boston, making a proposal on WBZ for all of the business leaders and citizens of Boston. The new Boston, a whole entirely new landscape in the city. Now, Prudential is not the first people to, and I should say, when they get to Boston, they're thinking about the new technology corridor running on Route 128, right? There's going to be a ton of investment opportunities in the region coming up. So they pick Boston for their regional home office. They have this kind of vision. They have a regional vision in the investment opportunities there, not a provincial vision that some of the others might have been accused of. They weren't the first to consider building there. There was an incredibly ambitious proposal from the mid-50s from Roger Stevens, the real estate developer. He hires Gropius, Bauhaus, and Harvard, and Pietro Belluschi, and many of the leading academic lights of the architectural establishment of that time to design the Back Bay Center on the same site. Much the same program of the Prudential. It's designed with a lot more specificity in some ways. They've got an internal shopping mall here, and we can talk more about this, but the point is that they had an incredible design. And Roger Stevens eventually goes to Prudential. And Gropius and Belluschi go to Prudential and say, you guys own the site now? We got a plan for you. We're ready to go. Turnkey operation. Here are the plans. Build it. Prudential says, no way. There is no way we're going to deal with you academic eggheads trying to build it. You guys don't know what you're doing. We want to work with a commercial architect with real experience in big, large-scale planning projects. We want to work with Luckman. There he is, Luckman and Pereira. This is very classic kind of combination here. You'd have a design architect, that's Pereira. He's wearing a smock. And you'd have a business architect. That's Luckman. He's got the pipe, but he's got his shirt sleeves rolled up. He's ready to get dirty. He's ready to see what's going on here. It's like Adler and Sullivan. Adler's business, Sullivan's design. This is a long-standing tradition in architectural pairings here. Right? So Luckman is an interesting character, and they trust him because he's coming from the world of business. Before he comes back to architecture, Luckman was the head of Lever. Luckman is sitting at the very center of Lever's empire of soap, owned by Unilever. Lever is the American side of the business. In fact, it's Luckman who commissions Lever House right here in New York. He would take up the credit for the design. Luckman said, he was trained as an architect. He goes into business. Luckman said, I walked up and down Park Avenue. I wanted to figure out what kind of building I wanted. I said, I'm going to give light and air back to the city. I'm going to give light and air back to the street. I'm going to lift the building off the ground. No retail on the ground level. Let people walk right through the building. Now, these are all of the elements of this kind of modernist architecture and urbanism that we associate from this period. And, of course, it's a particularly elegant example of that. We credit Bunshaft with it. Luckman would always say that it was really his idea for the design. But he leaves Lever, and he comes back to architecture. He's tempted by BillPereira. They have all these incredible publicity shots in the Luckman archives, which I ended up finding in Los Angeles. Here they're meeting Ike. Pereira is totally uncomfortable. He's like, he doesn't want anything to do with it. Luckman's like ready to go. He wants the next commission. They get a ton of commissions from the government. They're building Air Force bases, Edwards Air Force Base. They build mission control in Houston. They build a huge Air Force naval base in Spain. They get a ton of projects. Some of this work is really interesting. The CBS television City by Pereira and Luckman, the Berlin Hilton of 58, master planning at LAX in 58. This is all Pereira and Luckman, when Luckman and Pereira are still working as a team. They even come up with an incredible proposal for the Seagram's building right here in New York. There's a great new book Phyllis Lambert's worked on now about the Seagram's building, where she must mention this too. Phyllis is the one that saw this proposal and said, you got to be kidding me. You got to get some real architects to make a building here. So Luckman does this thing for the New Yorker. And he's such a great businessman. I don't often buy stock in our clients' companies, but Seagram is so well managed that I have bought stock in it. He's great. He's a brilliant businessman. And he talks about how I'm firm in my belief that architecture is a business and not an art. And I won't read this whole thing to you now, but it talks about his attitude as a cost cutter and as caring about the budget. This is something that corporations could relate to and really appreciate it. They didn't want to work with modernists who might do something to advance an agenda. They wanted to work with a guy that was a little bit more pliable. Okay? We know the story. It would end up being built by Van der Rohe and Philip Johnson with a very successful and much documented plaza. But in the late 50s, they split. Pereira said, I can't handle this guy anymore. I don't want to be in a business, really. I want to work more of a kind of artistic model here. And he would go on to do some pretty amazing stuff. This is just one small example because we're in the Skyscraper Museum. I figured I'd show you his Transamerica Tower of 72. Insurance company. I wouldn't be surprised. What would he change? I'd make it 100 feet taller. Pereira was a planner for Irvine, did a lot of very interesting work, and that's a whole other discussion. Luckman then goes off to start his own firm, and he starts churning out these projects for cities all across the country. He sells soap the way he sells architecture the way he sold soap. I guess meaning in bulk is what that implies. Kind of deploying the same building here in Kansas City, the tower with the pavilion with parking in it usually. Here it is in Portland. But he did some interesting buildings too, right? He was not a total corporate hack, right? He was asked by the World's Fair Commission to design the U.S. Pavilion, and it's a building very much in the style of the time in a way. Ed Durrell Stone's. It's a very kind of Ed Durrell Stone building. If you're trying to draw some relationships here between what Luckman was doing in the 60s and some of the popular buildings of the time. That's the New Delhi Embassy. That's the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. So Luckman and Stone, if you're trying to get a kind of genealogy going, those two are definitely paired. But this is what maybe we know him best for in New York. Luckman! Madison Square Garden, that's right. Now, why are we so upset about this? Because it turned out to be such a great building. Who's seen Killer's Kiss? Oh, you got to see it. One of Kubrick's earliest films, where it begins and ends with him pacing there in the incredible vaulted waiting room of Pennsylvania Station. And that's Philip Johnson and Jane Jacobs saying, "Save it." So Luckman is now vilified, in some sense, as being the maker of this sort of monstrosity over what was New York's greatest train terminal. I mean, listen. it is what it is. If you're a hockey fan, it's a legendary place. I mean, the fight of the century happened in Madison Square Garden. So our attitudes do need to have a little bit of leeway here. And he was extremely proud of the fact that they built this entire thing over an operating railroad. And let's not forget, the reason why Penn is doing it, I mean, this is not Luckman's decision, it's the Pennsylvania Railroad doing it because they want to get more money out of their urban property. So he comes to the Prudential Center, right? Now, Luckman, he's a corporate architect. He's done a lot of crappy work. Okay, fine. But he's no intellectual slouch. This guy's got ideas. He has ideas about architecture. He wants to humanate the center. It's a little awkward construction. It's like somewhere between humanization. It's somewhere between humiliation and annihilation is really what it is. But it's based on a credo amongst the modernist architects for humanization of cities, to make spaces within the city that we can really all live in and enjoy, to open it up, to give plazas back, to make space for the people to walk around in and enjoy themselves. And look at this kind of urban pastoral that they begin to develop for the Prudential Center. So he has ideas about these places that he's trying to implement. It turns out, ladies and gentlemen, that many of these plazas, they were awkward gestures at Civic RDS. They didn't really turn out to work all that well. They weren't the nicest plazas to really be in. They weren't the Suburbs Plaza. He overdoes the water features. He surrounds the whole thing with a moat. People getting blown into the moat here. He's got a moat around the tower. He's got a moat around the retail pavilions here. But let's just look at this. I mean, what does he want to build here? He wants to build, a great Greek agora. He wants to build the Roman Forum. He's got all of the basilicas and the stoas here. It's lovely evocation of a classical public space for the people. Of course, it's got nothing to do with the street, and this turns out to be the fatal flaw of modernist architecture. You get there by taking the elevators up from the parking garages. So it didn't turn out to work out all that well. But there it is. It's finally open in 1965. And the competitor, they got to be seething, John Hancock. That's the local insurance company. They're incredibly PO. They can't believe it. But they're gracious. They say, okay, toast to the new Prudential Center. Here's looking at you. Now, they do look at the Prudential Center. This is Hancock's lovely 49 tower, also in the Back Bay. I mean, I won't talk about this today, but it is really an extension of the whole Back Bay insurance district. That's New England Mutual. That's the Hancock. So they are looking at each other. And then, as a kind of keeping up with the corporate Joneses, a little bit later, they would be looking directly at the Pru. From the Pru to the new 1970s Hancock Tower, designed by Pate, Cobb, and Freed. Very well known for some of these mirrored pieces of glass dislodging and coming crashing to the ground. That's the Hancock, not the Pru. It is considered to be the more elegant tower, but again, it's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But there it is. It is a sign that I really want to hammer home for you here, how Prudential did insure the city in this way. They give confidence to other investors to take on these projects. Say, listen, we can make it work in Boston. Boston's going to be an important city. Boston's not going to end up like all of the other ones that now have struggled, haven't they? Like Buffalo, like Rochester, like Detroit. Boston in the 50s sees themselves in this kind of game. So Prudential's investment is crucial. And many, many more buildings would come to follow as the local banks get in on the act. And many of the great architects that were rebuffed by Prudential get to work, finally. Gropius and Tack, well, here they're working for the Feds, with the Federal Building. The Architects Collaborative, which is Gropius's firm, Fiduciary Trust. Shama, Hugh Stubbins does the Federal Reserve here. There's Hancock. Christian Science Church gets in on the action. They build an incredible tower. So Prudential's investment is a crucial tipping point in Boston asserting itself as a successful place. And listen, it has. Boston is a successful place. Boston is one of the cities that has development pressure. Boston is one of the cities, like New York, that has to deal with the fallout of development pressure, like gentrification and displacement. Which is why when we talk about gentrification, we have to realize it's a double-edged sword. Gentrification, in some ways, is a good problem to have, because it means that your city is desirable. It means that it's active. It means that there's a development culture. Buffalo would kill for some of the gentrification of a place like Boston, San Francisco, and New York. Some of the big winners in this kind of hierarchy of cities being sorted out in the 50s and 60s. We made some mistakes. I'm drawing to a close now, people. We made some mistakes, okay? We made some mistakes. Our eyes are readjusting. For the planners in the 50s, the after is the good. For us, the before is the good. This is New Haven now, and the Oak Street Connector again, before they put in Knights of Columbus Tower. We made some mistakes in terms of not failing to recognize this as being an important and interesting neighborhood, an important part of town. And sometimes we try to correct these mistakes too, in a way that can be itself sort of awkward and self-defeating. So when the Coliseum becomes derelict in New Haven, they tear the thing down, and now it's an open parking lot. Now it's an open parking lot, and you can enjoy parking here today while we build for tomorrow. And what is the city of tomorrow? The city of yesterday. The city that we took down. This is the most amazing sign that I've ever seen. This is the city of tomorrow. You just can't believe it. So we're trying to correct for these mistakes sometimes, even as it seems so incredibly awkward. Now, there's good points and bad points. Yeah, the Prudential design could have been a lot better, but it is still part of a tradition of patronage, okay? And we can debate this too in terms of the role of corporations. It's quaint. When you think about the footloose and sometimes ruthless decisions that corporations make today, Prudential's investments in Boston and so many other cities is almost quaint in terms of thinking about it. And it harks back to when the sewing machine company and the typewriter company and the five and dime company would build incredible skyscrapers to help represent their business and to anchor the cities in which they were a part of, to offer this kind of civic jewel to the city. Prudential was a part of that. And guess what? It's been flexible. Prudential Center today is nothing like the way it was when it opened in '65 or even the way it looked in 1980. They've completely remade it, and they've rebuilt it around our contemporary urban logic of streets and squares, internal streets now, and malls and arcades, and an incredible shopping mall that they now put in here, and built tons of new buildings and rebuilt over the ring road that used to circulate around the whole thing, which I should have probably mentioned more in more depth. They built over it and built up to the street now again to rebuild the street. And Prudential Center is an active and vital part of the Back Bay environment now. Would the Gropius plan have been so flexible? Probably not. It might have worked, it might not have. The counterfactuals are very difficult. But the Prudential Center could thrive partly because it was so bad, because it was so flexible. And no one ever put up a preservation case like, oh no, don't touch the Pru. That was never an issue. So it's been able to survive. It's an incredibly resilient landscape. So I'll close with those thoughts. Thank you so much for letting me come here and share parts of this story from Insuring the City. And if we have time for questions or anything else like that, I'd be happy to take them. Thanks so much.